Hey, it's Ryan from Hooktheory.com, and today we're going to do something that I have really been wanting to do for a long time now, which is that we are going to write a song in Hookpad from start to finish. So we will start in Hookpad, we're going to write out our chords and our melody, but then we're going to take that, we're going to export it, throw it into a digital audio workstation. I'll be using Logic for this, and we're going to make some real music. So we can basically see the whole songwriting process from the conception of the song all the way through to the finished product. So the reason why we're going to do this today is because recently I was asked to score a short film, which I'm super excited about. And I thought it would be a really great opportunity to basically go through the thought process of how we write music together. So anyway, there's this scene in this movie, which I can't show you, unfortunately, because the movie is not out yet. But basically, the director wants kind of a smooth, loungy kind of jazz combo piece that's featuring a tenor saxophone. So this isn't going to be necessarily like a pop song. But what I'm going to show you today is that in a lot of music, including kind of jazzy music like this, we're going to be using the same hook theory concepts to guide us as we go through it. All right, so let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is figure out how much music we need. So in our case here, the scene is just under a minute. So essentially what you can do is take the time that you need, so just under a minute, multiply by the tempo that you want, and divide how many beats are in each measure, so typically 4, and that will give you the number of measures that you need. So in our case, we have about 0.9 minutes, just under a minute. We're going to pick kind of a slower tempo, so 72 beats per minute is pretty good. And we have 4 beats in each measure. So if we divide that out, that equals to around 16 measures, which is great. So let's open up Hookpad. And if you are following on Vimeo or YouTube, I would encourage you to click the link in the comments where it will take you to a page on our site that has both this video and a copy of Hookpads that you can follow along with me. Okay, so this is supposed to be kind of a more complex jazzy piece, but what we're going to do is we're going to still start with a very simple chord progression, and I'll show you how to take that chord progression and add complexity to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with just a 1 chord. In fact, we're just going to make it simple and start off with a lot of 1 chords. We can change this later, but I think this is going to give us a good foundation. We don't want to start off too complicated because we can always add more complexity later. So what else are we going to do? So let's agree that we're going to end on a cadence chord. So let's make this a 5 chord. And let's set up this cadence with a good pre-cadence chord. So let's make this a 2 chord. And well, let's see. So what should go in here? Let's just do maybe the obvious choice. We'll make this a 4 chord. You can also ask Magic Chord what it thinks. Let's see. Let's see what Magic Chord thinks actually. Okay, so Magic Chord thinks we can use a 6 chord or a 5. I think I'm going to stick with the 4 chord. Okay, so this is a pretty plain chord progression, and our tempo is quite slow, 72. So this isn't going to really sound like much, but I will play it for you anyway. Let's actually put a 1 chord at the end of this, just so that we can hear how this ends. Okay. To the pre-cadence 2. Cadence 5. Back to the 1. Okay, so it's a little bit plain, but it's a solid progression. Okay, so I had said that we want to make this kind of a more complex sound. So how are we going to do that? We're going to make this sound more complex using two different techniques. The first is we're going to play with the quality of these chords. So we're going to try to use more complex sounding qualities without compromising the chord progression. The second is something really that we should be doing all the time, which is that we're going to focus on really the flow of the progression. So even though we're using more complex sounds, we want to make sure that we're still cadencing properly. We're remembering to do things like connecting bass lines and make sure that the chord progression is coherent. Okay, so let's start with the quality. So one really simple way, if you're looking to make a more complex sound, is you can experiment with making chords into seventh chords. Okay, so for instance, here we have a 1 chord. And if I go up to the embellishments and I click 7, this is now a 1-7 chord. So let's hear the difference. 1, 1-7. The 1-7 is what's known as a major 7th chord, which has that scale degree 7. So you see if I hover over the 1 chord, we have 1, 3, and 5. If I hover over the 1-7 chord, I have 1, 3, 5, and 7. So adding that fourth note along with the dissonance of scale degrees 7 and 1 creates a much more complex sound. Okay. Similarly, if we go to the 4 chord, let me make this a 4-7. Again, we have this extra dissonance caused by the major 7th. Now, what happens if we make a minor chord a 7th chord? Well, let's go to 2. So 2 becomes 2-7. Now, this is slightly less dissonant, and it has to do with the spacing between those two consecutive notes, the 2 and the 1 here. Let's hear the difference. So that's 2-7, 2, 2-7. It's kind of a nice mellow sound. And then finally, if we take the 5 chord and we make this a 7th chord, this turns into what's known as a dominant 7. And in kind of chord notation, we would just call this G7. So when you guys see a 7 next to a chord, it means dominant. Other 7th chords, like the minor 7, will say M7, and the major 7 will say MAJ7. Or sometimes if you see a triangle in jazz notation, that means major 7th. Okay, so let's just change all of these to 7th chords. It's kind of a real simple thing we can do. And I want you guys to listen to how this changes the feel. So I'll just start from this 1/7 chord so that we don't have to listen to the whole thing again. Okay, so that actually did a lot, right? This sounds way more mellow than before. So what are some other things that we can look for? Let's see. Well, one thing that I see is that we put a lot of 1/7 chords here, and this is a long time to be on 1/7. Now, that could totally work, but let's try something more interesting. So right now, this 1/7 to 4/7 is a really, really nice change. It sounds great. But let's try changing this chord up a little bit. So one thing to keep in mind is that, especially if you're trying to go for a kind of a more complex sound like we are here, is that you shouldn't be afraid of using chords that are outside of the key, that are non-diatonic, as long as they make sense within the flow of your progression. For instance, here, one really nice thing we can do is instead of doing 1/7, is let's use a secondary dominant to the 4. So let's do, instead of 1/7, let's do 5/7 of 4. Okay. So now what we're doing is the 5/7 of 4 shares the same bass scale degree 1 as the 1/7. And if you roll over these notes, you can see basically that the only difference between the 1/7 and the 5/7 of 4 is that scale degree 7 is flat. Okay, so this is kind of just a subtle change, but it's going to kind of add some more anticipation to this 4 chord. Let's hear how that sounds. Hear that flat 7 there. Okay, so that's pretty nice. What else can we do? So let's see, I like this 1 7 5 7 4 to 4 7. Let's take a look at this 4 7 to the 2 7. So one thing we can do is, you notice this is a 4 and this is a 2. We can bridge this. I'm going to split this, and I'm going to throw in a 3 chord. So now we're connecting this bass line, 4 3 2. Let's hear this. Okay, so by connecting this bass line, it kind of gives the progression more continuity. Okay, so we can take this even a step further by bridging this 3 and 2 with a chord that has a bass that's in between 3 and 2, like a 2 sharp or a 3 flat. So those of you who are a little more advanced with music theory, why don't you pause the video now and see if you can come up with what chord could go in between this 3 and 2. I'll give you a hint. There's 2 that I can think of right now. Okay, so the first one would be if we take a 3 7 and we borrow it. So this is a 3 flat. So this goes 3 3 flat 2. Okay, whenever you're doing this kind of chromatic progression, so we're taking a note that's a bass note that's in between 2 diatonic notes, 2 notes that are in the scale. One thing that's always good practice is to make the quality of this chord dominant. It just turns out from jazz theory that this ends up working well. Okay, so here's another advanced music theory question. What mode do I have to borrow from to make this a dominant 7? I'll give you a couple seconds. Okay, so if you said the Phrygian mode, then you'd be correct. How do we know that? Well, the 7th scale degree of this chord is the 2. So in order to bring this to flat, we need to go 4 modes down, 7, 3, 6, 2, to get it to be flat. So that's why we have to borrow from the Phrygian mode, which is 4 modes down. Okay, so let's hear how this sounds. Okay, pretty good. That's really a nice descending line right there. So I'll teach you guys one thing that I personally really enjoy. So hear how the top note voiced in this chord right here is scale degree 5. Da. And then it's voiced again here on top. So one thing that would be nice is to kind of preserve that. This has 5, 5. This goes down to the 4, which is really nice. But if you want to preserve that 5, what we can do is we can actually make this a suspended chord. So now instead of scale degree 4, that goes up to the 5. I really like that sound, but that's just personal preference. Okay. All right, so let's hear our whole progression now. Okay, so this is sounding pretty good. Let's see. So one thing that I've noticed is that we kind of just made every chord here a 7th chord, and that's definitely not a bad way to go. But let's see if we can come up with something that doesn't just involve all 7th chords in root position, just to be interesting. So let me take a look back at this 3. What's another chord that we could use? It can still be a 7th chord that also has a 3 in the bass that seems like it would connect this 4 and the 2 well. If you said an inverted 1 chord, that's what I was thinking too. So let's go, and I'm going to change this to a 1, and we're going to put this in first inversion. Okay, that's interesting. And let's take a look at this chromatic passing chord here and come up with something different. So I said that there are two options that I had in my mind about what could bridge this 3 and 2 with this 3 flat / 2 sharp. Can you guys think of what the other chord is? I'll give you a couple seconds. Okay, if you said an applied 7th chord, that's what I was thinking of too. So if we take 7 of 3, that's essentially a 2 sharp, and that's another chord that has that same bass scale degree. Okay, and I'm going to actually make this, I'm going to get rid of this suspension, because now it goes 5, 4 sharp, 4, 4, 3, which is a really nice line. Okay, so let's hear how this sounds. We'll start from the beginning, just so you can get the whole feel of it. All right, so let's finish up our progression. I'm going to just start by copying measures 2 through 8 into the bottom line here. And for the second time around, I think it would be fun to do something a little different. Let's change it up just a little bit. Okay, so let's focus on this sequence of chords here. 1, 7, 5, 7 of 4 to the 4, 7. So if you think about it, what we're really doing here is kind of focusing on this 4, right? Because we have this 5, 7 of 4 is acting like a cadence chord to the 4, 7. Much in the same way that our cadence chord 5, 7 focuses here on the 1, 7. Okay, so I'm going to teach you guys a little trick here. Anytime that your progression is kind of centered around a 4 chord, or it's focusing on this 4 chord, what you're really doing is you're kind of temporarily going into a Mixolydian feel. And to illustrate this, let's take this 5, 7 of 4, which is really kind of a 1 scale degree bass chord, and I'm going to turn this back into a 1, 7, and I'm going to borrow this now from the Mixolydian mode. And look at what happens. We have this 1 flat 7, which is exactly the same chord in terms of scale degrees as this 5, 7 of 4. So how does that work? Well, the Mixolydian mode is very similar to the major mode, except for one key difference, which is that scale degree 7 in the Mixolydian mode is flat. So if I hover over this 1, 7 chord, we see this is 1, 3, 5, 7, natural 7. However, if I hover over the borrowed Mixolydian chord, it's going to be the same scale degrees except for scale degree 7 is flat. And that's the reason why this 1, 7 borrowed from the Mixolydian, this Mixolydian 1, 7, is the same chord as the 5, 7 of 4. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means is that when we're looking for chords in this sequence that's focusing on the 4 chord, we should be thinking about the Mixolydian mode. So let's take a look back at our 2, 7, 5, 7, 1. We could say, well, we really like this, right? This is a precadence chord going to the cadence chord 5, 7 to our home bass 1, 7. Can we do something similar to this 4, 7, right? We know that this 1, 7 here, this Mixolydian 1, 7, which is really a 5, 7 of 4, is acting like our cadence chord. Is there a way that we can put a chord here that's acting like our precadence? So we go precadence chord to our kind of temporary new home bass 4, 7. And the answer, of course, is yes. And the chord that fills that role in the Mixolydian mode is the 5, 7. So to illustrate this, let's take a look back at our 2, 7, 5, 7, 1. So this is D minor 7, G7, it's behind this plus here, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. So to demonstrate that this 5-7-1-7 in the Mixolydian mode 4-7 is actually the same progression as 2-7-5-7-1-7, I can show you that by just temporarily changing our key to G major. That makes the 4-7 a C major 7, and look at this. D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Exactly the same chords as our D minor 7, G7, C major 7 when we're back in our original key. Okay, so there you have it. I'm going to actually change this Mixolydian 1-7 back to the 5-7-4. I like the 5-7-4 better because I feel like this really emphasizes that the function of this chord is a cadence chord to this 4-7. And let's hear how this sounds. Okay, pretty nice. So let's do one last thing, and this is actually a really good trick for you guys to know. So, and I say it's a good trick because it really works in a lot of different genres. Pop, it works in jazz, it works in a lot of different styles. And what it is anytime you're using a 4 chord to transition to a 3 chord, or really any chord that has a scale degree 3 in the bass, what you can do is you can bridge it using a 4 chord that's borrowed from the minor mode. Now, this doesn't have to be a 4-7. It could just be a regular 4, like this. Since we're using 7th chords, I'll use a 4-7 here. But this works when you're not using 7th chords as well. And the reason this really works is it has to do with kind of an inner voice leading that we hear. So in particular, what I mean by that is if you hover over this 4-7 chord, you see how there's a scale degree 6 that's stable? Well, the minor 4-7 is going to have all the same notes except for, well, in the 4-7, I guess the 3 is flat as well, but you see how this has the 6? Well, this has a flat 6. So what we're hearing here is the 6 kind of descending to the flat 6, which then descends to the 5. And most chords with a 3 in the bass that we're going to be using here are going to have a scale degree 5 that's stable. So for instance, a 1-6-5, a 1-6, a 3 chord, or a 3-7 chord, those all have a scale degree 5. So we hear this 6, flat 6, 5. And anytime we can kind of connect these voices, it's going to make for a good progression. And I'll note that this continues on, right? 6, flat 6, 5, 4 sharp, 4, 4, and then if we end, I'll put in another line here, ends to the 3 here. Okay, so let's hear this from the 4-7. Okay, so we have our chord progression. That'll wrap it up for part 1 of this video series. And in the next part, we'll be tackling the melody and exporting to Logic and making some music. All right, see you soon.